This is the CDL pre-trip inspection at San Juan College, the CDL division. I'm Chris Kane. I'm going to demonstrate a proper pre-trip. As I approach the vehicle, I will look for any leaks or puddles on the ground. I will also check and see if the truck is leaning to one side or the other, which could indicate a flat tire, a broken suspension, or a shifted load. I'll also make sure I have the keys in my pocket and the wheels are chalked. This is the engine compartment on the passenger side. I'll check the oil with the oil dipstick and make sure it's in the proper operating range. This is the oil filler cap. We'll check and make sure this is secure, and this is where I will add oil if I need to. We'll check the turbo, make sure there's no oil or leaks. It's properly mounted and secured and it's not damaged. We'll inspect the water pump, make sure the water pump is not leaking, it's not damaged. If it is belt driven, I'll check the belt for no more than 3/4 of an inch of play, or specify if it is gear driven. We'll check the wiring on the alternator, make sure the wiring is not damaged, there's no exposed wires, it's on there nice and tight. We'll check the alternator, make sure it is properly mounted and secured, it is nice and tight, and it is not damaged. We'll check the belt, make sure the belt is not frayed, torn, cracked, and it is in good shape, and there is no more than 3/4 of an inch of play in the belt. We'll check the hoses, make sure the hoses are properly mounted and secured, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they are not leaking, damaged, or cracked. We'll check the fan, make sure the fan is in good shape, there's no fan blades missing, it's not damaged. We'll check the radiator, make sure the radiator is not leaking, it's not damaged, and it is properly mounted and secured. The radiator reservoir, we'll check the fluid level, make sure that there is enough fluid in here. I have a visible reservoir or a sight glass. If the engine is cold, we'll remove the radiator cap and check the fluid level. Never open a hot radiator. I will inspect the frame and make sure that it is not damaged, cracked, and there is no non-factory welds. I will check that down the tractor as far as I can see. The driver's side engine compartment. We'll check the fuel pump, make sure the fuel pump is not leaking, it is in good shape, it is properly mounted and secured. We'll check the power steering reservoir with a dipstick, make sure it's at the proper operating range, it is not leaking. We'll check the power steering pump, make sure the power steering pump is on here nice and tight, it's properly mounted and secured, it is not leaking. We'll check the power steering hoses, make sure they're not leaking. I will check the air compressor, make sure the air compressor is properly mounted and secured and it is not damaged. We'll check the power steering hoses, make sure there is no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. We'll check the power steering gearbox, make sure it is properly mounted and secured, it is not damaged, and it is not leaking. We'll check the pitman arm, make sure it's not damaged, it is on there nice and tight. Check the drag link, make sure it is in good condition, it is not damaged. We'll check the steering knuckle, make sure it's in good shape, it's not damaged. We'll check the castle nuts and the cotter pins, make sure they are in good shape. We'll check the castle nuts, make sure the castle nuts and the cotter pins are in place. We'll check the tie rod, make sure the tie rod is in good shape, is not damaged or broken. And we'll check the steering axle also, make sure it is not bent, twisted, damaged, or broken. We'll check the brake air line coming through to the brake chamber, make sure there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and it is not leaking any air. If I have ABS, I will check the ABS line, make sure it is properly mounted and secured, and is intact and in good shape. We'll check the brake chamber, make sure the brake chamber is in good shape, is properly mounted and secured, it's on there nice and tight. We'll check the seat clamp, make sure the seat clamp is on here nice and tight, and it is in good shape. We'll check the push rod, make sure the push rod is not bent, damaged, or broken, it is on there nice and tight, and the slack adjuster. is on there nice and tight, and all the pins holding the slack adjuster to the push rod are in place and in good shape. If I pull on the slack adjuster, I should not have more than 1 inch of free play. Okay, I will follow the slack adjuster down into the brake drum, into the brake lining. We'll look through the sight hole, make sure my brake pad has no less than 1/4 of an inch of lining. We'll check my brake drum, make sure my brake drum is not worn dangerously thin, it's not cracked, heat warped, and any oil or grease on the drum could indicate an interseal leak. We'll check my spring hanger, make sure it's not damaged, properly mounted and secured. My shock absorber is not leaking or damaged and has a good rubber bushing on it and is in good shape. We'll check my leaf springs, make sure they are not shifted, twisted, damaged, or missing. We'll check the U-bolts, make sure the U-bolts are on here nice and tight, properly mounted and secured, no evidence of any shifting, which will be indicated by any shiny spots. I'm going to check the tires on the top, on the inside, and on the outside. I will check my tread depth, make sure I have no less than 4 30-seconds on the steer tires, and no recaps. We'll check the tires for abrasions, bulges, and cuts, or any foreign objects sticking in them. We'll check the rim on the inside and the outside, check the bead of the tire, make sure the bead is in good shape, it's not damaged or bent. We'll check the rim for any cracks, any non-factory welds. We'll check the lug nuts, make sure they're properly mounted and secured. Check for any rust rings on black rings on an aluminum wheel or rust rings on a steel wheel, which could indicate a loose lug nut. We'll check my hub seal, make sure it's not leaking and it is properly full with the correct amount of oil. We'll check my valve stem, make sure it has a metal cap, it's not touching the rim or the drum, and check inflation with a tire pressure gauge. We'll do the exterior driver's side inspection of the outside of the vehicle. I'll check the batteries, make sure the batteries are properly mounted and secured to the battery box. Check the battery box, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. We'll check the wiring, make sure it's not damaged, there's no excessive corrosion. If it's a maintenance-free battery, life is good. If it's not a maintenance-free battery, make sure that the battery is full to the proper fluid level. There is no excessive corrosion on the battery posts. We'll check the fuel cap, make sure it's got a good rubber seal on it. It opens and closes easily. We'll check the tank for no damage, any cracks, or any leaks. We'll check the tank straps, make sure they are properly mounted and secured and they are nice and tight. We'll check the mirrors, make sure the mirrors are properly mounted and secured. They are nice and tight. We'll clean them if necessary. We'll check my driver's door, make sure it opens and closes from the inside and the outside, that it locks and unlocks, and that the window rolls up and down. We'll check my grab handles, make sure my grab handles are on here nice and tight, they're properly mounted and secured. We'll check my weather strip, make sure my weather strip is in good shape and it is not damaged. We'll check my driver's seat, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. I will check my steps at the driver's door, make sure that they are properly mounted and secured and there is no foreign debris that can cause me to slip or fall. I will inspect the back of the tractor, make sure there is no damage, no rips or holes or tears, and any lights that are on here are operational and clean as needed. We'll check my electrical line on the back of the tractor, make sure it is in with a safety catch and plugged in properly. We'll check the air lines coming out of the back of the tractor, make sure they are not damaged and they are secured properly and not leaking. We'll check my grab handles, make sure it is properly mounted and secured. We'll check my catwalk, make sure my catwalk is properly mounted and secured. It is nice and tight. We'll check my steps, make sure my steps are properly mounted and secured. They are not damaged. We'll check my electrical line going down to my trailer and my air lines, make sure they're not damaged and they're not rubbing on anything, which could wear through the hoses. We'll check my electrical line on the front of the trailer, make sure it's got the safety catch in place, it's properly secure. We'll check the emergency line, make sure the emergency line is in good shape and the service line is attached. We'll look in the glad hand and make sure there's no foreign objects or any condensation. They've got a good rubber seal on the service line. We'll check the emergency line, make sure there is no condensation or any foreign debris and the rubber seal is in place and in good shape. We'll check the frame all the way down to the tail of the tractor, make sure there is no non-factory welds, any cracks. We'll check the cross member, make sure the cross members are not cracked or damaged and there is no non-factory welds, and all the bolts are in place and they're nice and tight. I will check the U-bolts, make sure the U-bolts are properly mounted and secured and there is no shiny spots. We'll check the shocks, make sure they're in good shape, they're not damaged or leaking, and they have a good rubber bushing in place. We'll check the torque rod, make sure the torque rod is properly mounted and secured, has a good rubber bushing in place. Check the spring hanger or spring mount, make sure the bolts are on there nice and tight, it is not damaged or cracked. We'll check the leaf spring, make sure the leaf spring is not shifted, twisted, damaged, or missing. We'll check the airbags, make sure the airbags are in good shape and they are not dry rotted or cracked or leaking. We'll check the airbag mounts, make sure the airbag mounts are in good shape and they're not cracked or damaged and they are properly mounted and secured. We'll check the air lines coming to the brake chamber on the front drive axle, make sure there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts and they are not leaking. We'll check the brake chamber, make sure the brake chamber is in good shape, it's properly mounted and secured, it is in good shape. The seat clamps are on here nice and tight and they're not loose. Check the push rod, make sure the push rod is in good shape, it's not bent or damaged. Check the slack adjuster, make sure it's on there nice and tight and the pins connecting the slack adjuster to the push rod are in place. If I pull on the slack adjuster, I should not have more than 1 inch of play. I'll follow that into my brake drum. I will look through the sight hole and make sure I have no less than 1/4 inch brake lining. We'll look at my drum, make sure my drum is in good shape. Make sure there's no evidence of any heat warping, any cracks or tears. Any oil or grease on the drum could indicate an inner seal leak. We'll check my drive axle, make sure my drive axle is not damaged and it is in good shape. We'll check my drive shaft, make sure my drive shaft, all 3 pieces, is in good shape, it's not twisted, damaged, or broken. We'll check my U-bolts, make sure my U-bolts are in good shape and they're properly mounted and secured and properly lubricated. We'll check my drive tires, inside, outside, and top of both tires. Make sure I have even tread wear, that there is no foreign object sticking in them, and I should have at least no less than 2/32 of tread depth. And if I have recaps, make sure my recaps are in good shape and not coming apart. I will check the inside and outside of my rims. Check the bead, make sure it's in good shape, it's not damaged. There's no cracks. There's no non-factory welds on the rim. We'll look in between my tires to make sure there is nothing stuck in between my duals. If I have spacers, make sure they're in place and not rusted out. We'll check my rim for any non-factory welds or any excessive rust. Check my lug nuts, make sure they are nice and tight. We'll check and make sure I do not have any black rings on aluminum or rust rings on a steel wheel, which could indicate a loose lug nut. I will check my axle seal, make sure it's not leaking, all the bolts are nice and tight. We'll check my valve stem, make sure it is not touching the rim or the drum, make sure it has a metal cap on it, and I will check inflation with the tire pressure gauge. We'll check my mud flaps, splash guards, and make sure they are properly mounted and secured. They are on there nice and tight. We'll check my tail lights, make sure they are red in color, the lenses are not damaged, I'll clean them as needed. We'll check my fifth wheel. Make sure the locking jaws are locked around the shank of the kingpin. We'll look at the gap in between my skid plate and the apron and make sure there is no gap in between. I will check my locking jaw release lever, make sure it is in the locked position, and if there is a safety catch, the safety catch is in place. I'll check my sliding fifth wheel locking pins, make sure they are in and in the locked position, and that I have enough clearance in between the landing gear of the trailer and the frame of the tractor. I will inspect the platform, make sure the iron connecting the platform is not damaged or broken and all the bolts are in place. We'll check my skid plate, make sure my skid plate is not damaged. It is in good shape. We'll check the gap in between the fifth wheel plate and the apron of the trailer and make sure there is no gap. I will now check the front of the trailer. Make sure there's no damage. Good shape. The lenses on top. Make sure they're amber in color. I'll look down the side of my trailer and make sure there is no rips or tears in the side of the trailer. All my lights and reflectors are in place. They are amber in color to the front, red to the rear. As I walk to the tandems, I will check my cross members of my trailer and the frame. Make sure they're not damaged or broken and they're in good condition. Alright, I'll check the landing gear and make sure the frame of the landing gear is not damaged, bent, or broken. Make sure my landing gear goes up and down in high and low range. We'll check the tandem release arm. Make sure it is in and in the locked position. If there's a safety catch, make sure the safety pin is in place. We'll check the pins on the sliding fifth wheel. Make sure they are in the proper position and that they are in place and not damaged. We'll check the air lines on the sliding tandem on the trailer. Make sure they're not hanging too low to where they can get caught on any debris. I will check the leaf springs. Make sure the leaf springs are not shifted, twisted, damaged, or broken. We'll check the torque rod. Make sure the torque rod is in place, is properly mounted and secured, and has a good rubber bushing. Check the spring hanger. Make sure the spring hanger is in good shape. It is not damaged or broken. It is properly mounted and secured. We'll check the U-bolts. Make sure the U-bolts are on there nice and tight and they are not damaged. We'll check the airbag. Make sure the airbag is in good shape. It is not dry rotted or leaking. Now we'll check the airbag mounts on the top and the bottom. Make sure they are in good shape and they are properly mounted and secured and not damaged. We'll check the trailer axle. Make sure the axle is in good shape. It is not damaged or broken. We'll check the air line going to the brake chamber. Make sure there is no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It is not damaged or leaking. We'll check the brake chamber. Make sure the brake chamber is properly mounted and secured. We'll check the C-clamp. Make sure the C-clamp is properly mounted and secured. It is nice and tight. We'll check the push rod. Make sure the push rod is not damaged, bent, or broken. We'll check the slack adjuster and make sure it is in good shape, it is not damaged or broken, and that the pins connecting the slack adjuster to the push rod are in place. If I pull on the slack adjuster, I should not have more than 1 inch of play. Okay, I will follow the slack adjuster down into the brake drum. Check the brake lining, make sure there's no less than 1/4 of an inch of brake pad left and it is not damaged. We'll check the brake drum, make sure there is not any cracks, any evidence of any heat warping, no non-factory welds. Any oil or grease on the drum could indicate an inner seal leak. We'll check the tires inside and outside on both tires and across the top. Make sure I have even tread wear. Should have no less than 2 30-seconds on the tires. And if I have any recaps, I'll make sure they're not coming apart or damaged. And I will check for any abrasions, bulges, or cuts. We'll check the inside and outside of the rims, make sure the beads are in good shape. Make sure the rims do not have any excessive rust. Any rust rings on a steel wheel or black rings on aluminum could indicate a loose lug nut. We'll make sure I do not have any oblong holes. I'll make sure my lug nuts are nice and tight. And we'll check the hub seal, make sure my axle seal has got the proper fluid amount in it and that it is not leaking. We'll check my valve stem, make sure it is not touching the rim or the drum. Make sure it has a metal cap in place, and I will check tire pressure with a tire pressure gauge. We'll look in between my duals, make sure there is no foreign object sticking in here. If I have a spacer, make sure it's in place and it is not rusted. Make sure that my wheels are butted against each other. We'll check my lights on the tail of the trailer, make sure they are red in color. Make sure my clearance lights on the tail of the trailer are red in color and they're in place. Make sure my tail lenses are red in color and clean them as needed. Check my door hinges, make sure my hinges are in place. My door latches are in place and they're operational. And they are properly mounted and secured. I will inspect the DOT bumper on the rear of the trailer, make sure it is not damaged, it is on there nice and tight. I will also inspect the mud flaps on the rear of the trailer, make sure they are properly mounted and secured. We'll check my license plate, make sure it is properly mounted and secured, it is in place, and that I have a license plate light. This is the passenger side inspection on the exterior of the vehicle. I will inspect the passenger side of the vehicle just like I did the driver's side. If anything is different on the passenger side, I will inspect that item also. I will check the exhaust, make sure the clamps are nice and tight. There is no black soot or rust on the exhaust. Make sure it is not leaking. We'll check the brackets on the exhaust, make sure they are properly mounted and secured. They're on there nice and tight. And I will check the exhaust under the cab, make sure the exhaust is in good shape, it is not touching the cab or the frame. There is no wires or hoses touching the exhaust. Now for the in-cab inspection. We'll do a safe start and make sure I'm in neutral. My clutch is depressed. We'll turn the key on, check my ABS light if I have one, make sure that goes off. We'll check my oil pressure. Make sure my oil pressure is at the operating range. My water temperature should slowly rise as the engine increases to the operating range. My voltmeter is in good operating range, between 12 and 15 volts. My tachometer is operational and should be within 6 to 650. We'll check my air pressure gauges, make sure they're building pressure. Check my fuel gauge, make sure I have enough fuel for the trip. My front and rear differential temperatures. That's the application gauge. I will use that for my 3-point air brake inspection. We'll check my left turn signal indicator on the dashboard. We'll check my right turn signal indicator on the dashboard. We'll check my high beam indicator on the dashboard. I will check my 4-way indicators on the dashboard. Make sure it is operational. I will check my heater and defroster. Make sure that it works up on the window and down on the floor and all fan speeds. I will check my windshield wipers, make sure they are operational, and the window washer, make sure that works. I will check the free play in my clutch. Should have no more than 2.5 inches of free play, and it goes all the way up and all the way down freely. We'll check my gear shifter, make sure it goes into high and low. Check the gear shaft, make sure there's no air leaks. We'll press the clutch in, make sure it goes in and out of every gear freely in high and low range. Make sure it's in neutral and release the clutch. I will check my steering wheel, make sure I do not have more than 2 inches of play or 10 degrees on a 20-inch steering wheel. I will now inspect my horn, make sure that my horn is working. I will check my seat belt, make sure my seat belt latches and unlatches. and it is not frayed, ripped, or torn. I will check my mirrors, make sure they are adjusted to me, the driver, and they are not damaged, and clean as needed. I will check my spare fuses and make sure I have extra fuses unless I have circuit breakers. We'll also check my fire extinguisher, make sure it is properly rated and secured and charged, and also that I have 3 reflective triangles. We'll check the windshield, make sure the windshield has no rock chips bigger than 1/4, no cracks longer than 2 inches, and there are no illegal stickers. Now that my air pressure is built up to the governor cutout, I'll begin my 3-point air brake inspection. With the brakes released and the air pressure built up to the governor cutout and the wheels chalked, I will turn the truck off, apply 90 pounds of pressure to the service brakes. If I do not have an application gauge, I will press the pedal all the way down. We'll watch the gauges for 1 minute. Should not have more than 3 psi loss for a single unit or 4 psi loss for a combination unit in 1 minute. I will turn the key back on to where I have electricity on the dashboard but do not start the truck. We'll fan the brakes on. Before 60 psi, I should have a light, a buzzer, or a flag. For part 3, I will continue to fan the brakes down in between 20 and 40 psi. The tractor protection valves and the parking brake should pop out. That is my 3-point air brake.